My name is Marcus Reed. I've been a car mechanic for most of my life, 24 years to be exact. I've spent more time around engines than around people. Grease on my hands, oil stains on my shirt, and the hum of tools, that's my kind of music. I run a small garage in South Chicago, tucked between a laundromat and a barber shop. It's not much, but it's honest. My father taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by the price of his clothes, but by the pride he takes in his work. Still, the world doesn't always see it that way. The afternoon walk, it was a bright Friday afternoon, warm sunlight hitting the pavement. I'd been under the hood of an old delivery van all morning. My back ached, my stomach growled, and my hands were black with grease. Across the street, a shiny glass building reflected the sky, a fine dining restaurant called Mason Pier. I had driven past it many times but never stepped inside. I could smell roasted garlic and butter drifting through the air, and for once I decided to treat myself. I took off my gloves, wiped my hands on a rag, and crossed the street. My reflection in the glass door told a story of its own, a man in his 40s, dark skin, short beard streaked with gray, wearing oil-stained coveralls and worn boots. When I walked in, the room went quiet for a second. Conversations paused, forks froze midair. Then slowly the chatter resumed. A young waiter, tall and thin, with slick blonde hair and a sharp jawline, approached me. His name tag read Ethan. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Yes," I said, smiling. "Just a table for one." He hesitated, his eyes flicking over my clothes. "I'm sorry, sir, we're fully booked today." I looked around. Half the tables were empty. "Oh, that's all right," I said softly. "I can wait." He glanced toward the hostess, a young woman named Claire, who raised her brows as if silently asking, "What's he doing here?" Ethan cleared his throat. "I'm afraid we only accept reservations." I nodded, though I could see the lie written all over his face. "Got it," I said quietly and turned to leave. As I walked toward the door, I heard Claire whisper, "Probably thought this was a diner." And Ethan chuckled. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to echo in the part of your heart that's been hurt before. Humiliation outside, I sat on a bench just across the street. I wasn't angry, not exactly, more like disappointed. It wasn't the first time. I've been called boy, chief, the help. People assume a man in coveralls must be poor, uneducated, or less than. They don't see the degrees of skill in my hands, just the dirt on them. As I sat there, I took out my phone and checked my messages. One from Mr. White, the owner of White Motors luxury dealership. He'd written, "Marcus, thanks again for fixing the Maserati. You're a lifesaver." I smiled faintly. Sometimes respect comes from the unlikeliest places. Just then, a loud, sharp noise snapped my attention, the sound of a car engine sputtering and dying. I looked up. Right in front of Mason Pier, a black Mercedes S-Class had rolled to a stop. The driver tried to start it again, nothing. Smoke began to curl from under the hood. The restaurant door burst open, and a man in a gray suit stormed out. He was in his 50s, heavyset, bald on top, with a gold watch glinting in the sun. The name tag on his jacket said Richard Cole, General Manager. "What the hell happened?" Richard barked at the driver. The driver looked nervous. "Sir, I don't know, it just shut down." Ethan, the same waiter who turned me away, stepped outside to watch. He had that same smirk on his face. Richard shouted, "Call someone from the dealership." The driver hesitated. "It'll take at least an hour, sir." Richard cursed under his breath. "An hour. I have guests coming in 10 minutes. That's when I stood up. "Excuse me," I called out. "I might be able to help." Richard turned, his expression skeptical. "Who are you?" "Marcus Reed," I said. "Mechanic." "My shop's right over there." Ethan frowned. "You again?" Richard hesitated, scanning me from head to toe. "You think you can fix this?" "I can try," I said simply. "The repair," he sighed. "Fine. But if you break something, you're paying for it." I nodded and walked toward the Mercedes. The hood was warm, the smell of burnt oil rising. I popped it open and leaned in. Within seconds, I spotted the issue, a loose connection in the fuel relay. A small problem, big consequence. "Got a wrench?" I asked. The driver hurried to the trunk and handed me a small toolkit. I worked silently, tightening the connection, adjusting the line, and cleaning the residue with a rag I kept in my pocket. Behind me, I could hear whispers. "Is he really touching the boss's car? Man, this is gonna be a disaster." 5 minutes later, I closed the hood. "Try it now," I said. The driver turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth. Clean, perfect. Richard's eyes widened. "You fixed it." "Yes, sir." He looked at Ethan, who was standing nearby, speechless, then back at me. "What do I owe you?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nothing. Just doing my job." Richard hesitated, then smiled for the first time. "You sure?" "Yes, sir. I was just looking for lunch." For a moment there was silence, a kind that makes people look at each other differently. Richard looked down, ashamed. "You came into my restaurant earlier, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. He turned to Ethan. "You turned him away," Ethan stammered. I didn't know what?" Richard interrupted. "Didn't know he was a paying customer." Ethan's face turned red. Richard took a deep breath, then said, "Mr. Reed, would you do me a favor and join us for lunch on the house?" I hesitated, but his tone was sincere. "All right," I said softly. The table of silence when I walked back inside Mason Pier, every eye followed me. The same people who'd looked away earlier now couldn't stop staring. Richard led me to the best table near the window. Ethan followed, carrying a menu, his hands trembling slightly. "What would you like, sir?" he asked quietly. I looked up at him and said, "A burger will do, and some coffee, please." He nodded quickly and left. As I sat there, the air felt different. It wasn't about food anymore. It was about dignity. The hostess, Claire, passed by and offered a hesitant smile. "I'm sorry for earlier," she said softly. "It's all right," I replied. "We all learn." When the food arrived, it was perfect, juicy, hot, and served with the kind of care that only guilt can inspire. Richard came over halfway through my meal. "Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for what happened, but for what my staff assumed." I smiled gently. "Apology accepted." He nodded. "May I ask, how did you know what was wrong with the car so fast?" I chuckled. "Experience. I've worked on everything from old Buicks to Bentleys. Cars talk to me, you just have to listen." Richard laughed softly. "If I ever need a mechanic, I know who to call." I finished my meal, stood up, and offered my hand. "Thank you for lunch." He shook it firmly. "Thank you for the lesson." The turning point, a week later, something unexpected happened. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of my garage. Richard stepped out wearing casual clothes this time. "Mr. Reed," he said warmly, "I brought my wife's car in. It's making a weird noise." I smiled. "Let's take a look." As I fixed the car, he looked around the garage at the old posters, the worn tools, the photos of me and my dad working side by side. "You built all this?" he asked. "From scratch," I said proudly. "Started with one jack and a dream." He nodded slowly. "I misjudged you, Marcus. That day at the restaurant, I realized how easy it is to let appearances fool us." I looked up. "We've all been there, Richard. What matters is what we do next." He smiled. "You're right, which is why I want to make you an offer." He handed me a card, Cole Auto Group, Executive Maintenance Partnership. "I want you to be our official maintenance partner," he said. "You'll handle our entire fleet. It's good money and well-deserved." I stood there, speechless. "You sure about that?" I asked. He nodded. "Absolutely. You fixed more than my car that day. You fixed my perspective." Closure months later, I drove past Mason Pier again, this time in a clean uniform with my company logo on it. Ethan was still working there. When he saw me through the window, he paused, then gave a small nod of respect. I nodded back. Because sometimes change doesn't come with speeches or apologies. It comes quietly in the way people look at you differently after they've learned who you really are. As I drove off, I thought about my father's words again. "A man's worth isn't measured by how the world sees him, but by how he carries himself when the world looks away." And that day, the world had looked away. But I stood tall anyway. Because respect, real respect, isn't given. It's earned. Moral of the story, never judge a person by their clothes or their job. Character, humility, and kindness will always shine brighter than appearance or wealth.